Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to make a start in a moment. Just waiting for a couple more people to join us. My name's Louisa, by the way, and I'm curator of talks and events at the Photographers Gallery. It'd be great to get a sense of where everyone is tonight. If you want to just maybe put in the message box where you're based, and then we'll make a start in a moment. Cool. I think most people are in here. So thank you once again for joining us this evening. My name is Louisa Uliet, and I'm curator of talks and events at the Photographers Gallery. I'm delighted to be here with my colleague, Anna Dannemann, senior curator at the Photographers Gallery and exhibition curator of the current retrospective on Helen Levitt, currently on display at the gallery. Anna has worked with many leading contemporary photographers and artists, curating the Deutsche Börse Photography Foundation Prize for the past 6 years, from 2016 until last year, and other exhibitions, including the work of Alex Prager in 2018, and a group show called The Feminist Avant-Garde in 2016. Together with Walter Moser from the Albertina, she led on the current exhibition of American photographer Helen Levitt, who remains one of the most influential street photographers of the last century. Tonight, Anna will talk us through the exhibition, the strategies she and Walter applied in displaying Helen's work, and the approaches they took in connecting the lives of the subjects represented to you. In terms of format, we will start with roughly a 20 to 30 minute presentation by Anna before moving to questions from me and then contributions from you. The event should last roughly 1 hour in total. Please note we are recording this, however, you will not be featured and will only appear at the end if you decide to pose your question directly. We are approaching this event with the aim of creating a forum of trust and mutual respect, so please keep that in mind in your questions and how you communicate over the chat function. Lastly, before we start, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you again at some of our other forthcoming online activities, and even more hopefully at the gallery, where you can see the work of Helen Levitt in person and a new commission by British artist Helen Kamick. Anyway, thank you all again, and now to Anna Dannemann.
Thank you so much, Louisa, for that wonderful introduction, and especially thank you all for joining us tonight for this talk about the Helen Levitt exhibition that's currently on at the Photographers Gallery. We're missing my co-curator, Walter Moser, who is one of the kind of most fantastic curators I've ever worked with, who is unfortunately not able to join us tonight. So I'll try my best to do this by myself. We have been working together now for just over 2 years on this fantastic exhibition of Helen Levitt's work, and I hope I can give you a kind of introduction to her work, but also to this exhibition retrospective that is on at the moment at the show. Helen Levitt is, as Louisa already stated, one of the most significant street photographers of the 20th century. I'll start sharing my screen as well. Hope you can all see this. That's Helen Levitt, photographed by her friend Walker Evans in the 1940s. And she has created an outstanding body of work in a genre that was mostly dominated by men. And as a woman photographer, she really managed to kind of slice into that kind of section of photography and make it her own. And this exhibition that we have brought together is trying to really show her as a serious photographer that has produced such an outstanding body of work and such an innovative body of work. She was brought up and born in 1913 in Brooklyn and died in Brooklyn in 2009. And all of her life she has spent in that city, New York, that she really, I mean, her work and her career is really almost like a love letter to the city and what has happened in that city. She has mainly photographed in the streets of East or Spanish Harlem and in the Bronx with her 35mm Leica camera. And later, and that's what I mean about the innovation around her work, because she ventured into filmmaking as well as color photography, to find really new means of expression within the medium of photography. She has been such an accomplished image maker, and her photographs are really spellbinding. If you have a chance to ever see an image of hers, you will never forget it, because it tells this little narrative and this little story within itself. And she doesn't really document in a way that kind of social documentary maybe approaches the work of street photography, but it's more around happenstances and also kind of little scenes and irrationalities that kind of surprisingly say something quite profound around the life on the streets. And although she has become quite a known figure as a street photographer in her own right, I do feel that it's still, she's still not as well known as some of her contemporaries like Walker Evans or Henri Cartier-Bresson. And I think that she's really a kind of artist that has been so well known, but at the same time is kind of over and over rediscovered by new generations. And I really hope that for the people that already know her work a little bit, this exhibition brought a different perspective into her work, and maybe for others, it might also offer just a first insight into Helen Levitt's career. This exhibition has been, of course, made possible with the help of so many other people. So it's a close collaboration with the Albertina Museum, who showed the exhibition before, and also with the estate of Helen Levitt, that was predominantly run by her good friend and assistant Marvin Hoshino, who sadly passed away while we were producing this exhibition. So this entire show is very much dedicated to him. As well as we have to thank all of the lenders, the Galerie Thomas Zander, who are now taking over the estate of Helen Levitt, the Margulies collection in Miami, and loads of private collections, and mostly of those who wish to be, who won't be named today, are those from those private collections. So these, I would like to really thank these lenders, and especially also Walter Moser, for this incredible work that we are showing at the gallery, and also that has been presented so wonderfully in other exhibition formats as well. So let's dive straight in. These are installation shots from our exhibition. It's across 2 floors. And we have tried to, instead of kind of showing a retrospective of 6 decades of work and just kind of going it chronologically, we have always tried on the walls to kind of find these little moments, these little narratives that might illuminate what her work was about and what she was looking for. One of the main subject matters that were quite compelling, quite important in her work, was this understanding that was very much kind of, she got influenced by Henri Cartier-Bresson about this decisive moment in photography, that we can have one moment captured and that is telling a whole different story. And that was something that she was extremely intrigued by. The other element that she was interested in, and for example, this is one of those examples, what a wonderful image to be captured, this one moment captured where these girls are kind of looking to the side and looking to the bubbles that are kind of floating around. It was often described that this approach of hers was a very intuitive approach, that it wasn't something that she was kind of finding and rationally kind of searching for, but it's an intuitive approach where you almost by luck find this gripping composition that then kind of talks about maybe a different form and a different truth. And because each of her images are so singular and so interesting in its own right, we felt that they need quite a bit of space around them. So as a kind of curatorial concept, we always felt that it needs its breathing space around it so people can really investigate each and every image. And it's always such a joy to see everyone kind of looking very closely at these vintage prints. This image that she has taken of, again, children playing on the street was then later also the cover of her first book, A Way of Seeing, that she produced together with James Ache, who specifically wrote an essay in that book. And I want to just read one little line from the introduction in that book, which reads, Helen Levitt's photographs seem to me as beautiful, perceptive, satisfying, and enduring as any lyrical work that I know. In their general quality and coherence, moreover, the photographs as a whole body, as a book unified in a unified view of the world, an uninsentient but irrefutable manifesto of a way of seeing, and in a gentle and wholly unpretentious way, a major poetic work. And that kind of sets the scene of how she was often viewed by some of her contemporaries as kind of, oh, she's a female photographer and there's like this kind of emotional, poetic work that she's producing. But she was a very cunning and very intelligent photographer as well. And she produced images not just in a way of kind of copying those others' masters, but she produced them as a way of kind of making her own understanding of, for example, what is the street, what are the street scenes, and also kind of finding these little moments where something doesn't quite gel up, and through this not kind of finding just this one narrative, it's almost like making it more intriguing to look at. In this one introductory room, we selected these 5 images that I think tell also of this other element in her work quite well, which is this kind of surrealist moment. So you have these boys and girls on the streets making the most of whatever they can find around them, kind of from scraps, and they puzzle together some games they might be playing, but then they kind of put themselves in gestures and in kind of weird moments where almost the body that they have in a kind of twisted in a strange way. And I think this is also something that tells of Helen Levitt's kind of quality of what she was looking for these kind of surrealist moments in everyday life. So what is the boy, for example, here actually doing? Is he looking at himself in the reflection of the car? Is he looking at something on the floor? Is he just holding himself and someone needs to kind of go and help him? It's just like, there's these many different kind of ways to approaching an image like that, but it's definitely got this surreal quality that she was kind of looking for. She often, and another chapter in our exhibition is called The Street as a Stage. So she often looked at these moments also where again there was a lot of found things that these children were just playing with and making the most of what they could find, obviously not as supervised as they would be today. And they are just these kind of brilliant scenes where there's so much happening, but it's also kind of creating these different stages and steps in the pictures. So this kind of mirror or this frame that is holding up is obviously kind of centrally picking up on the boy standing in the middle. There are these others crouching around as if they're kind of setting up a play or a performance for themselves. And this is kind of all unfolding in front of her eyes. So she was kind of going around in the streets, especially in the 1930s, 1940s, and just took hundreds and hundreds of images of children and people hanging out on the streets. Of course, the streets at the time were much more of a meeting place, and people were hanging out much more there than in their own homes. So it had a quite significant place in people's lives, that life on the streets. One of the myths that we also felt we needed to debunk is this understanding that she just came across these moments, but she was also cunningly waiting for them. If you see here, this comparison, we have on the one side, the image, which is just a fantastic image. The girl, obviously a pregnant woman, and then a girl walking by, and she captured that moment where the pregnant woman looking at her just like, oh my God, and not approving. And she was hanging around. If you see here on the slides on the other side, she was just hanging around waiting for that moment to happen. So it wasn't something that she was constructing in any ways. It was a happenstance, but she saw it coming. So it's a very cunning and a very clever kind of image making process, I think. And that was one of the things that is often, if you think about, again, back to something Ajay was talking about, this poetry in the street, she was creating and writing almost that poetry and finding it in the street in that way. And she had such an eye for finding these people that then kind of were almost bigger than life and were able to kind of say something more around human emotions, or around almost like in stage plays, standing in for a different understanding of a character, of a scene. She was, as you can see in this image, also highly influenced by kind of slapstick comedy, Charlie Chaplin, silent movies of the kind of 40s, 1920s to 1940s, all of that, as well as the kind of Henri Cartier-Bresson and Walker Evans kind of tradition of photography influenced her, but she was able to kind of draw them together. And I want to read a little quote from our catalog that was produced alongside the show, where we have a fantastic essay by Duncan Forbes. And he brings it together quite wonderfully, I think. Levitt's accomplishment was to capture through the lens traces of both realism and surrealism, holding their contradictions together within a single image. And I think that that quality, that kind of this amalgamation of kind of both realism and surrealism is what makes all of these images so powerful, and what makes her such an incredible image maker, that we still look at these images and it's just like, what is happening? And that they have this power is also kind of visible in this image of those three women. We always do in our exhibition some comment cards, and we ask the audiences if they feel for it to kind of leave comments or kind of choose a favorite image in the exhibition. And one person, I only went up there today, and one person wrote about that exact image. Three women frowning at what seems to be the photographer. Why? Who are they? Is this a bad day for them? What day is it? And why they are wearing these clothes. But I think this is these questions, these kind of activation points, is kind of, you look at them and they feel like, are they people, or are they kind of almost performing for the camera? What is the kind of intent of it? But you can almost feel yourself what they perceive. So I think it's such a clever way of photographing as well, and it hasn't lost anything of its kind of importance today. Another image, and here again we're kind of debunking the myth that it's just a one-off shot, but she took loads of these images of these four people standing in front of a building, obviously on the steps in front of it, until they were just in the right composition to kind of be really behind each other, looking in different aspects and capturing that one moment, which is just perfect. in the exhibition, we're showing these kind of slides next to actual prints of the finished shot as well. One of the only times that Helen Levitt went and photographed somewhere else than in her hometown, New York, was in several months in 1941, where she went to Mexico. And we've included 6 images in the exhibition around that. And it's kind of interesting that that was literally the only time she ever went anywhere else to photograph. And in Mexico, Mexico in itself, of course, attracted a lot of artists at the time, such as Cartier-Bresson or Sergei Eisenstein. And it was around this kind of documenting the difficult living conditions of the people living there. And but I wouldn't say it's the most successful series within Levitt's work, to be honest, because I think that this understanding of you know, the surrealist perspective is kind of missing within that aspect. It's kind of going more into a social documentary style, and she's really more looking at and documenting these kind of difficult moments and the difficult circumstances, living circumstances in Mexico. The first time Helen Levitt ventured out into film or moving image was in 1945-46, and together with filmmaker Janice Loeb and writer James Adjei, she produced this incredible movie that is also part of the show. And I hope to show you a little scene from it later on. But I just, it is an incredible movie. It's kind of, it's not a narrative structure, but it is just piecing together little moments on the street. And again, they're almost kind of performative acts, but they're obviously something that she just came across on the street. She didn't intervene in any way, but they become these kind of little slapstick moments where you have small sequences of kind of children chasing after each other, and then an adult kind of interfering with their game or something like that. And you just feel almost like one of her images or several of her images coming to life. It's very close to her photographic work, this film. So we really felt it's kind of a nice end point to that floor to stop there, to see kind of how she was experimenting with a moving image, but how close that was in some ways still to the to her still photographs. Then on the lower floor, we looked into this understanding that she had and that some of her contemporaries had as well around children playing on the street or children playing full stop. Because of course that was as part of a kind of the surrealist movement, something that a lot of the artists felt really is as a moment for freedom, where the kind of a counterpoise to capitalism and this understanding of these adventures, and that there's like a different type of life and a different type of creativity born within that. And so you find images of people, of children masquerading themselves. You find this kind of probably around Halloween or just as a kind of game, them hiding in boxes. You have these moments of violence as well. So there isn't necessarily, it's all just peaceful games and all wonderful, but there's also this kind of violence, violent moments in it. And what you can see here as well, which is really interesting, is that she went so far as cropping her images so they would be, for example, what was originally a portrait format would be a landscape format. So she was really working with her images here as well. I think again, it's in her work so important that she didn't use these children from often deprived neighborhoods as a kind of document or as a kind of sign of this is where we are and this is what has to change, but she almost made them their protagonists. They are there and they inhabit these streets and they are active and they are in their own right themselves. And I think that is also giving them that back, not kind of judging them and saying, oh, we have to change your circumstance and you poor you, but it's kind of this, we are interested in you because it's spectacular what you're doing. And that is something that I think is so interesting within her work. A few more examples where the children just make the street their own, maybe not in the most peaceful way, and maybe because it was the time of the Second World War, of course, as well, and they or just before, no, during the, and they maybe just mimicked as well what they saw around them and they saw in the press. So that aspect of children at play is really, I think, one of the most engaging kind of parts of her kind of entire photographic career. She always came back to the photographing children as well on the streets, although of course later the 1980s, and so there was much less life on the streets, full stop. In the one of the next chapters that we kind of try to take out of the other chapters that we have created within the space is the series that she created around a New York subway. And that was, of course, highly influenced and inspired by Walker Evans' series on the New York subway as well. But what's so interesting, and she actually accompanied him on one of his journeys, and he also borrowed, so the camera that he used was actually kind of a hidden camera, and it was in some way mechanically possible so that the people weren't aware that they were photographed in the 1930s and 40s on the subway. So she could take these kind of incredible in the moment pictures, people snoozing off or of people just hanging out. But what was so interesting around that as well is that she worked in a kind of serious format. So she took a lot of images in the same way, the same kind of perspective. And she repeated that as well in the 1980s, so almost exactly 40 years later. And of course, you can see the difference while the aspect ratio and everything else is still the same, but the difference in how the people behave, what their clothes are, how they sit, who they are, and so on. And again, these are these wonderful surreal moments where she just captures them. Someone just about to sneeze. It's just a very great image. And one of the last chapters in the exhibition is actually the color photography. So as well as venturing out into film, she also ventured out into color slides, and really from the 1950s on, she produced a huge body of work in color photography. And so she was really a pioneer in that field. Unfortunately, a lot of her work was stolen, and she was then in the 1970s, and then she basically felt like that body of work she couldn't continue. But then she did a few more color photographs in the 1980s specifically. So there, it's just a small section. We have around 80 slides, which are really incredible. And also these little jewel-like color photographs that again, look at the streets in New York, look at a kind of similar environment, but now it's all in color and all kind of feeling quite different. So to end my little presentation before we can maybe start in dialogue, I just wanted to show you 3 of my favorite images. So the first one is this little girl kneeling, and it's again kind of this twisted kind of angle that I don't know exactly why she's crouching there, if she's looking for something or is there, but I feel it's that same understanding of seeing one's reflection in that shiny car surface, and just kind of making the street something to be played with and played on, and even the car something that she might be able to use in that play. The next one, which one I really like, is this image, because it's just such a joyful image of this, whatever game it is, but it's also this kind of surrealist or slapstick kind of moment again. Just a fantastic moment captured. And then obviously one of the things that also became quite interesting was graffiti, or this writing on the street that a lot of surrealists saw as a kind of different form of expression, and she was also interested in that. And she photographed a lot of kind of graffiti or kind of little writings on the wall. But I just love this little button to the secret passage and press there. It's just such a creative way of understanding the street and so your surroundings. And just as a last slide, wanted to show you this kind of engagement that we had within our exhibition. Well, again, we asked the people or audiences to just choose one image, and a lot of them chose to just draw that image instead of write something. Helen Levitt always said about herself that she can't, express herself well in words, but she can make images, and that's how she can express herself. And I feel that that's translated extremely well to our audiences in that way, or hopefully it did. Well, we could say so much more, but maybe I leave it here for the moment, and we can start a conversation together.
Thank you so much. That was really brilliant. And I appreciated you ending, you can hear me okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
I appreciated you ending on those 3 images. They really encapsulate to me her work, both like the color, the usage of color, the text, and like I suppose the graffiti, and that how that suggests really the city, and also like the playfulness. One thing that I don't think you've really touched on is the role of humor in Helen's work. I know it kind of comes through a little bit in her experimentation with like surrealism, but I wondered if you could say something more about, that decisive moment that she captures, and, the humorous aspects, like that person who's about to sneeze, that woman who was looking into the baby's bassinet. Yeah, is there something you can say about that? And thank you also for a brilliant presentation. A lot in like 30 minutes.
I think that the element of humor, I mean, it's such a difficult thing to talk about, because on the one side, obviously she was very much influenced by surrealism, by the decisive moment, but also by kind of intellectual scenes like who were more looking into how can images be used for political purposes as well, and especially in the kind of after the 1930s, this idea of what has happened after the collapse and so on of the financial system. They needed to kind of show what has happened with the people, and I think she actually brought something into that dialogue and into that discussion, which is quite different, which is the element of humor and the element of enjoyment and life, I think, to some extent. It is very much also influenced by something like Charlie Chaplin and slapstick comedy, and this idea of, making fun with gestures and kind of positioning oneself in a really interesting and way that then kind of invites people to yeah, how surreal is your everyday life? How surreal is kind of some of the gestures that one makes, and then invites you to almost feel that again and relive, like, live that. So I think in her images, that's definitely, again, this amalgamation of something quite serious and something quite um, strange and absurd and wonderfully different.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that also about the humor in everyday life and also the surreal components. The exhibition really spans, the everyday life in New York and in other places. You said something really interesting, and I wondered if you could share it with our audiences about what this exhibition and what Helen's work can tell us about everyday life, and also how we can connect to it now, despite the distance of time and like geography really between here and New York.
I think that it's almost a directness, and if you see some of the images, it's just like there is no time past, but then of course they are witnesses of a time that has passed. We aren't living on the streets as shown in that time. We aren't kind of all hanging around and meeting each other, and then there's these absurd things happening and we can all talk about it. But it's kind of much more isolated, I guess. And I think, I mean, we had planned to show this work 2 years ago, but then obviously the pandemic came in and we couldn't show it at the time. And I actually think that it's so meaningful that we showed it now, because it's something kind of deeply human that she found there, but also something, yes, these isolated figures often in her images, but there's also this context of a group, of a neighborhood, of a community around it. And I think that in some ways, where in a time where we all were more separated from each other, it's really something wonderful to see that community or that kind of shared experience. And I think that that translates to the now as well as it translated at the time. So she had, for example, an exhibition of her children photography at MoMA, and also of the graffiti work in the beginning of the 1940s. So really, really early on, she had a lot of success already. But I think it's translated at the time as it did translate now. We can still connect to it in a very similar way, each individual, but also kind of coming together and looking at them. And everyone will see something different as well. I think if we all would describe the same image, we would kind of pick out little different bits. And that's, I think, quite powerful as well, that it's a collective experience, but also kind of each individually, we might see specific aspects of in there.
Yeah, definitely. And as you were saying, different moments in the past 2 years of isolation and separation, but also how with the pandemic, it's forced us into open spaces, and you see how life is playing out in the parks. I mean, London's quite different, at least where Anna and I are both based, where you don't have that same kind of brownstone stoop behavior, but you can see elements of that in how people are here. We have some questions coming in now. There's one around from Ross Drummond, who's asking about information on whether or not you know how she went about taking those photographs. Was she known in the neighborhood? What kind of relationship did she have with her subjects? Can you say anything about the permissions she would have needed to seek out at the time, if that was the case?
I think it's an important question, especially now, because obviously that has changed quite a bit. We are much more aware now around that the people that are on a photograph should also be part of this kind of, there's a right for them to agree or disagree to being photographed. I think at the time she did not go around, she did not ask for permission, but she was a visible figure. So she did not what was often kind of told as a kind of narrative that she would go around and hide the camera and no one knew she was taking pictures. She was actually doing that quite in the open, not on the subway. Yes, there's one exception to that, but for example, in the neighborhoods, she would just go around with her camera and hang around there. So she would be, Marvin Hushino, her assistant, told us once that she knew quite a lot of people in the streets. So it wasn't kind of she's this unknown figure, but she was kind of visiting, going in and out. She doesn't mean she knew every single person that she ever photographed, but it was a continuous presence in the streets. So there aren't, as far as we know and as far as we worked in the archive, any kind of permission sign, signed documents or anything like that officially made, but there was an awareness of her being there and taking pictures.
Yeah, it's quite a different time.
And yeah, exactly. If that is a kind of way of working now, I would put that onto every street photographer working right now in some ways, but at that time, yeah, she didn't seek out permissions in that way.
Yeah, the discussions right now around the agency of the subjects, the sitters, it's quite different. And yeah, I mean, depending, as you said, on how the photographer, the artist is working and how they talk about their own relationships.
And I have to say, I always feel, looking at her images, sorry, just to come back to that, I always felt like there's a lot of dignity to each and every one. So she's never making fun of anyone in a way that is like really, like, for even that woman, the pregnant woman looking at the other one carrying the milk in this way, like the other girl carrying that, there's nothing in there that is kind of degrading to the person or kind of
unkind.
Yeah, or unkind. It's actually lifting them up in many ways, I felt. So yeah, I think there's a very positive way of how she's approaching the people around her and wanting to photograph them.
Yeah, especially with what you said around how she's portrayed groups of people, children who have different kinds of socioeconomic backgrounds. Like you said, there's a dignity, they're not being humiliated.
Yeah,
it's quite different, especially with the work coming out of that period where you see a lot of, especially in the States, where there is a lot of poverty.
and the humor that you were mentioning is also, we're not making fun of them in a way. It is more like with them. We're of the scene, of the surreality of the scene, but not like, ha ha ha, look at you and how you look or something like that. That's not, it's much cleverer than that.
Yeah, to some degree, not, I mean, they don't hold the same kind of professionalism or polish, but they can remind you of those candid family type photographs, where that aunt in the background is just sort of doing something funny, but more deliberate in this instance, I suppose. Let's see, we have an observation from JM that just came through about an audio describer who thought, so this is around the hubcap that photographed with the car. So an audio describer thought it was possible that Helen Levitt is reflected in the hubcap of the photo of the girl next to the green car. They're just drawing your attention to that.
It might actually.
Are you going to share your screen again?
Sorry, I'm just checking. That is so interesting. Should I just share my screen?
Yeah, because otherwise you're just doing this.
Sorry, just like, that is really interesting. I never read it as a reflection of her. I thought it's a reflection of the girl. But yeah, might be true.
Yeah, it could be. Janice McLaren has just shared the link to the audio description. It is really fascinating with our audio describe tours how you can focus and see things that you might not normally, because it's a different way of looking at photographs or reading them.
Really interesting.
Anyways, she just wanted to draw our attention to that. There's a comment here from someone responding to the hubcap saying that it looked like She was having a wee in the gutter. Maybe I shouldn't have read that aloud. I wanted to remark on something that Paula said here about how Helen Levitt chose to share her contact sheets. And so typically photographers are quite shy or do not want to show them. I had a question around that, actually, around how you included the contact sheets in the exhibition and talked about it a little bit earlier. What were you trying to achieve in the exhibition? Because and I wondered maybe if it had something to do with her relationship to performance or her own relationship to cinema, which you kind of touched on, if that's the case.
Sorry, that feels like quite a bit now. So just to sorry, that's what was that?
So someone mentioned the contact sheets, and I was curious about their inclusion in the exhibition. And
I mean, to be honest, that's always the benefit of showing work by an artist that is no longer live, so we can go into the archive ourselves and find things that are interesting, that we find interesting, because as far as I know, she hasn't included it at the time when she was kind of working on exhibitions herself. So she did, for example, the slide projector that we are including with the color slides. That's something where she was working on the order that was shown at the MoMA as well for the first time, I think in the 70s, 72. But that was something that she deliberately kind of put in place, and she wanted that exact order and duration and so on to be presented. But then there are other elements, like, for example, the contact sheets that, as far as I know, have never been shown before. So there was often that kind of story around her work, or that it's a one-off image and all of that. But now we understand a bit better about how she was actually working and how she was waiting for these moments to unfold in front of her eyes, and also how she was working then later on with that material, thinking around, is that format right? What do I want to say? What is the kind of best composition that we can achieve here? So all of these elements as a kind of next step. And all of that process that she had is something that we felt really was an important element to understand her work better, and maybe to find new ways of understanding it as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting and fascinating to see too, because I don't mean to think so in such a linear way, but it gives kind of a cinematic element, because you see the sequencing of how that scene unfolded for that person. But yeah, thank you. We have a question from Jack, who is asking if you can say a little bit more about her work that was stolen.
About the color work. So basically she started in the 1960s or even late 1950s to work with color. Color slides were at the time much cheaper than color film. That's why she mainly worked with color slides. And basically what happened, she had a studio space, and out of that studio space, a whole lot of these slides were stolen. So she had revisited a lot of the places in Harlem and other, the garment district in New York and other parts. And she had created this huge body of work, but unfortunately it's lost. And what we have in the exhibition, and then later what became also as part of a publication, are mainly works from kind of later 70s, 80s color work that she produced. But she stopped for a time after to shoot in color specifically, but also to shoot overall, because of that kind of work was stolen, and she was just a bit depressed about that, as far as I can read it. And she didn't produce work for some time, and then she went back and produced more color slides. I hope that illuminate that aspect.
No, that would have been really difficult when I think about artists and photographers who've lost work in various ways. I mean, now sometimes it's because technology is failing them. But yeah, that would be a hard thing to come back from, but she did.
Yeah.
Let's see. Not sure. I don't think we have a couple more comments coming in. People are just saying thank you and that they hope to visit the show in person before it closes next month, by the way, just giving everyone a heads up. We have
the ways also that we were so keen to do this retrospective and this full retrospective of her work is because the Photographers Gallery has a longer relationship and history with Helen Levitt. So in 1988, it was the first time Helen Levitt ever was shown, or her work ever was shown in the UK, in London. And so and that was at the Photographers Gallery at the time. And then we included her work. Her work was included in 2 more exhibitions after that in the 90s. So it was just fantastic to revisit her work now in a much fuller way through this retrospective.
Yeah, there's some really great essays actually in the book, which I know you also have behind you, Anna, but for those who are interested in hearing a little bit more from Walter Moser, the person who co-curated this with Anna at the gallery, there's an essay by him in here that gives you a sense of his thoughts and his own approaches. But yeah, especially for those who can't come to London to see it, I urge you to at least have a look at our website for more information on that. But, yeah, I think yeah, that might be a good point to end things on. Thank you so much for tonight, Anna. It was really brilliant to hear a little bit more about the exhibition. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. To Walter Moser from the Albertina, who, as I mentioned, as we both mentioned, was unfortunately unable to join us this evening. And yeah, we appreciate your ongoing commitment to the gallery. And we're grateful to continue to be welcomed into your homes. And to have the opportunity to share the wonderful work of Helen Levitt. Anyway, I hope you're all okay and that we see you again at some of our other forthcoming activities online and even more hopefully at the gallery. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, wherever you might be zooming in from. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Louisa, and everyone for joining. Have a lovely evening.
Speak soon, Anna.
Bye.
Bye.